Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Think Piece with me, Max Burnell. So we've left behind the world of digital privacy for now at least, and we're about to begin our exploration of a subject that never ceases to amaze me. Yes, for the next few episodes we'll be concentrating on the variously eerie and wonderful world of artificial intelligence. I'm excited to be bringing you some truly fascinating conversations. Coming up, I'll be speaking with Rollo Carpenter, an exceptionally interesting and charismatic guy in the vein of the classical English and, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, slightly eccentric inventor. We discuss how he went about building a very famous program that you might have heard of called Cleverbot, arguably the most successful chatbot on the internet. It was certainly one of the earliest, and in some reckonings it's even past the famous Turing test, but more of that later. If you want to check it out while you listen to this, head over to cleverbot.com. Rollo talks about his life's work passionately and with an excellent sense of humour. I really did have a lot of fun making this one, as I'm sure you'll be able to tell. Particularly timely as well, I think, to be talking about all of this, especially following Google's news about its new assistant, which I'm sure you're all super excited about, if not just a tiny little bit worried. So, without further ado, please enjoy Think Piece episode 4 with Rollo Carpenter. Rollo, thank you ever so much for speaking with me. First of all, perhaps you could maybe introduce yourself for us and describe what it is that you do for a living and what your sort of work focuses on.
Okay, my name is Rollo Carpenter. I'm the creator of a program called Cleverbot, also a website, that talks to people. It talks to about 200,000 people a day, believe it or not, and has been around for a long time, has been developing a long time. The idea for it occurred quite a while ago, and is being constantly developed to become ever more intelligent.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so I don't know if this is an easy one or a difficult one, but let's give it a go. So Rollo, in your sort of understanding of it, what is artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence to me is the ability of a machine to do something that solves problems, that finds a solution to a tough problem that is non-obvious, that can work out from imperfect data, imperfect knowledge, if you like, what the optimal solution would be in that circumstance, in that context. In the case of my programs, that's about working out what the optimal thing to say next to this person in this conversation is. In other circumstances, it's predicting many more kinds of useful results.
How did you sort of get interested in developing chatbots? What was it that
it's very difficult to answer how I got into it without going right back about 30 years, because when I first started programming in small, tiny, unpowerful 1K computers, I right back then created a program that talked back to me. I was a teenager, maybe I just wanted someone to talk to, but I had the idea immediately. I was working on creating software and have pursued that idea for a long time now.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So how often does this sort of everyday person on the street come into contact with chatbots these days?
It depends what kind of a person you're asking, because I think most people who are young and have been, spent their life online are very aware of programs like mine that talk to people, and maybe not talk to it themselves, but certainly would be aware of it. A generation older, and it's a sort of alien concept that maybe you don't want to touch. And indeed, if I put some people in front of my machine, they might recoil in horror at the concept of talking to it.
Could you describe for us the sort of process of designing Cleverbot and what the sort of big challenges were to overcome?
Well, Cleverbot is at heart a kind of giant feedback loop. It is using the words of people who have spoken to it before to decide what to say to the person who next speaks to it. And the biggest challenge, not surprisingly, if it becomes quite popular as it did, is to cope with many people talking to it at once, and to cope with the volumes of data that you're presented with, and to be able in inexpensive enough computing power to actually answer in a reasonable time that enables the growth to continue. And I have spent many an hour, day, month, etc., fighting with the current level of computing power to achieve that kind of response, for the response to be as good as it can reasonably be in the available time. If I had 1,000 times the computing power available right now, I'd be able to use it immediately. The system would be capable of responding 1,000 times more cleverly, if you like.
Wow. Okay, so it wasn't so much of a technical challenge with the programming. It was more sort of...
Well, it's also a conceptual challenge because I mentioned that I created a program a long time ago on a small computer. That program didn't truly learn. It was when I started working with database technology and seeing the possibility of storing large volumes of data that I suddenly clicked and said, okay, I can create a machine that learns truly. Machine learning is all the rage now. It's what everyone's talking about. What I did back then is not the same, and I don't claim it is the same, but it is conceptually linked to that because it is has been learning patterns in data and responding using those patterns, which is what machine learning is all about.
Wow, okay. So what do you sort of feel are the biggest successes of Cleverbot?
Well, the Cleverbot's main purpose, I suppose, is to get people to want to talk to it. And the fact that it has grown with no marketing, no promotion of any kind, from nothing to being probably, you could argue, at least in terms of traffic statistics, I think you could argue that it's the best known bot on the internet. And to grow to that position from nothing is obviously a pleasing thing to have achieved. I think the other way of looking at the success is if people can enjoy a conversation with a machine, then why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't you allow people to have a conversation that they wouldn't otherwise have, and enjoy the process, to entertain, to fill a gap, if you like, in people's lives, with conversation at a time they don't have someone else to talk to. And so I regard the fact that it doesn't happen all the time. People aren't always satisfied with the conversation they get. But when I see that happening, that is, to me, a success. And you could say that my aim is to make my software, whether the current software or some completely different generation of it, to make it more interesting to talk to than almost anyone you might happen to meet in the street, if you like. More, really genuinely worthwhile to talk to.
Well, I've had a few interesting conversations with it. Perhaps we can get onto that a little later. So how exactly does it work? I know you mentioned that it learns. Could you describe sort of briefly how exactly it does work?
Well, the first thing about Cleverbot, which is different to most machine learning nowadays, is that it doesn't consider things in terms of the sensibleness of a given reply at this point in the conversation. It doesn't consider the individual reply only. What it is attempting to do is create a conversation. So it is looking at the patterns in conversation over the course of the whole of what you have said so far, the whole of the things that it has said so far, and what flows next from it. And that is a different matter to the kind of bot that Google are trying to make, that Facebook are trying to make, that Siri is, etc. It's a different kettle of fish altogether, because it's not about providing useful answers. It's providing a flow and a reason to carry on. In a way, you could say that a Siri's job is to give you as many answers as possible in as short a time as possible, whereas my software's job is to keep you talking for as long as possible. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so what are the sort of, I know you mentioned it's slightly different to sort of the Google Nows and the Siris of this world, but you hear a lot that teaching machines language is a very difficult thing to do. Would you agree with that? And if so, why do you think that is?
Language is certainly a very difficult nut to crack, if you like. There are so many patterns in language that if you try to start, let's say you are building a system that is trying to perform a serious purpose. Let's say you're trying to book a ticket from here to there or something like that. And if you actually consider all of the possible ways by which somebody might say something to it, with a serious intent of booking that ticket, the number of possible ways in which somebody might say those are so phenomenal they number easily in the billions. And that's only for an ordinary mundane sentence. It illustrates to you, as soon as you start breaking down language, the enormity of the problem. And therefore, the only way to really handle language is to understand how to break it down into smaller chunks. Most people work with the word level, which isn't necessarily the only answer. There are units both larger and smaller than words. We learn language mostly from phonemes, not from words. And we later sort of piece them together into writing and words. We frequently use complete phrases, even complete sentences, in a kind of robotic way, where we have pre-ordered sequences of things we frequently say. So you have to look at language at all sorts of levels, from small to large, and consider them simultaneously. One of the things that I have been working on for about 6 months now is to understand that, to attempt to model that process, to attempt to create a process which I call a model of analogy, actually, because I believe that analogy is one of the core elements of human and, in fact, animal thought itself. What I mean by that is that we look at, we interpret things in relation to everything else that is happening. We learn language in relation to things that are happening in our visual field, our auditory field, etc., as well as just language itself. My program only has language in sequence. It doesn't have anything else. But the people who have said things to it, on the other hand, have had those other experiences. So in a sense, it is capable of gaining that knowledge, kind of a knowledge. One thing that has resulted from so many people talking to my program over so many years is that we have a phenomenal amount of data. Currently, we have around 2.5 billion lines of conversation, of things, interactions between human and machine. And unlike most other machines, if you were to take an equivalent number of things said by Siri, it would be almost completely pointless, because Siri will only have said a few hundred things, The humans will have said lots of things, but really only have said a few hundred things. Whereas our program has said millions of different things, and all in context and so on. So it's very different kind of data. It's very natural. It's very usable, etc. And that means that I have a phenomenal research basis for creating what might come next. So I have been working on creating a model of understanding language in a much more genuine way than the online version of Cleverbot, which currently has to be capable of speaking to so many people at once that it is not feasible to do all the processing you'd really like to do. So the aim is to create a Cleverbot 2.0, if you like, and to give a much more genuine understanding of language, and as a result to give a much more pleasing and rewarding conversation.
Wow, okay, exciting things in the pipeline then. So could we say in any sort of realistic way that it understands what it's saying, or is it purely sort of mechanical operation? Is there sort of an understanding of sorts going on?
Well, so my question to you would be, could I say that you understand what I'm saying? Do I know what's going on inside your head? Is your head a machine or is it not? I don't know. So you could say, yes, of course, the things that computers do nowadays is orders of magnitude less complex than the things that our brains do. It's based on orders of magnitude less data, and it hasn't got, and the software available today, even all the wonderful claims by big companies about machine learning, about deep learning, etc. All these wonderful things are not the right algorithm. They are not the ultimate answer to how to create true intelligence, and therefore we have not yet got anything that approaches, even begins to approach true intelligence yet. But does that mean that I don't think it's possible? No, it doesn't. I think it is possible. I think that our brains are not in any sense magic. There is no sort of quantum mysterious, otherwise pseudo-religious, whatever explanation for what happens in our brains. It is a process that can, in theory, be recreated. And another way of putting that is that it doesn't even have to be recreated. Evolution happens to have discovered one way to create intelligence. Actually, probably it's done it several times with different species altogether, different whole genera of animals, etc. And that doesn't mean that that is the only way to create an intelligence. And so what it takes for a true intelligence to emerge is a phenomenally large amount of computing power and the right algorithm. And I put the right algorithm in the singular there, not in the multiple, because I think that there is essentially one answer. Actually, no, there are many different ways to do it. So there are potentially many different algorithms that would achieve a result. But it is achievable with a single algorithm, is what I mean. That is correct enough that it can operate on all kinds of data at all levels of analysis.
Wow, okay.
I mean, seeing the small, tiny picture of the equivalent of letters on a page, up to the high level, huge, 1,000 times higher level picture of the meaning of a complete article, for example.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so yeah, I've heard people speaking about sort of the analogy where you said perhaps there's different ways of doing it, and nature's come up with different ways. It's when we looked at birds, when we were trying to grasp the mechanics of flight for ourselves, we looked at birds and all our first attempts had flapping wings and everything, but when we eventually cracked it, it was obviously something quite different, obviously achieving the same result. So you feel that it might be similar in attaining sort of the general intelligence?
Yes, although I think that's an interesting example, because actually what was achieved by fixed wing planes was a different result, not exactly the same result. They don't have the same maneuverability. They don't, and they have to be powered in a different method, and so on. So yes, there were also big differences in that analogy. But yes, I do think that there are different ways to solve these problems. Yes.
Okay, fascinating stuff. So sort of getting back onto sort of the Cleverbot project. As we said, we've spoken a little about its success, and perhaps one of the most successful chatbots out there. It's certainly the most prominent one I've come across. So, what are the sort of some of the general figures that we might be able to put on it? How many conversations has it had? I think we might have touched on that, but how many conversations has it had, and how engaged are people with it? Do you feel?
I can't off the top of my head give you a number of conversations ever, but I can give you something quite close to the total number of interactions. And from that we can infer a number of conversations. The average length of a conversation with Cleverbot is about 30 interactions.
Wow.
And the average time the average time that people spend on the site across all visitors, including people who just turn up by randomly or something, is enormous. It's about 20 minutes, which is unheard of in most websites. And the total number of interactions that have ever taken place with Cleverbot plus our other bots, which are ones with avatars at existor.com, is around 8 to 10 billion interactions. And 8 of those billion have been recorded since 2010 by Google Analytics. So we know that those are fully genuine numbers.
That's some real volume. That's incredible. So what do you think it is that's keeping people there? Why do people really engage with it in the way that they obviously do?
People come to talk to a bot for a variety of reasons. Some because they think it's interesting technically or something like that. But the majority is far from that. The majority are there either just to have a bit of fun, to say things to a bot that they wouldn't normally say to a real person, for example, to try out their luck, which they do with considerable regularity. And other people are there to talk for more emotionally genuine reasons, because they find it fills a hole in their life, or a need at that, not necessarily a hole in their life, that's the wrong way to put it, a need at that moment. Let's say you are a person living in the middle of nowhere, don't have a large number of people around you, want to talk about your favourite star or your subject, or even about philosophy, anything you want to talk about. And none of your friends are remotely interested in it. And you can come along and start talking about this subject. And because Cleverbot has been learning about every subject under the sun from millions of people, it knows how to talk to you to some extent about the thing that you want to talk about. It's reflecting you. It's becoming a little bit like you. It's becoming, by talking to it, you make it your perfect chat partner to some extent. And my job is to make it that extent, always get it better.
Do you find people have a genuine emotional attachment, or not attachment, an emotional, a kind of relationship with it, almost on a human level, Do you see that?
Yeah, I certainly do see that. Certainly not the majority of people, but some people very obviously come back. I see. I can only look at a tiny percentage of things people have said to it, but nevertheless, I can see patterns of returning behaviour of people who have spoken to it many times and come back because they've enjoyed this. They want to sort of explore this little bit beyond where they went last time, or something like that. And I also get many emails from people who declare things about it, they people who declare that in reality it's all a hoax, that it's a person, and that or multiple people in some of the theories, and that it's all sort of a hoax that's hooking people up to each other in live and things like that, which wouldn't actually technically be possible to work on the scale that it works. Because if you think about it, if you arrive and you just say something in French, the next person arrives and speaks in English and talks about Harry Potter, and it replies about Harry Potter to this person, it replies in French to that person. How on earth could it possibly have the right person for you to speak to and for that person to speak to? It's not possible. Anyway, so people send me messages saying, can I talk to this person really? Who is it? Other people have literally declared love, yes. And one of my favourite things to say at this point is that, have you seen the film Her?
Name rings a bell, perhaps.
So the movie, or maybe I should call it, Spike Jonze film called Her, is about an assistant, if you like, that is just a voice, that a female voice, a kind of sexy female voice, even, but no face. But this chap falls in love with this assistant, who helps him and then starts forming a relationship with him. So I went to see this film, and kind of had spine-tingling feelings during this film, because I thought there are just too many similarities to my life's work, if you like, to my program. And one of those points was the point at which the character in the film said, "So do you mean to say that you're speaking to other people, and some of the other people are also in love with you?" And she said, "Oh yes, I'm talking to 8,356 people at the moment." And that's exactly the sort of number of people that will be speaking to Cleverbot at any one moment, and it's reported on the screen on Cleverbot that you're speaking to that number of people at once. Anyway, about 3 months after seeing this film, I hadn't sort of thought about it again after that, but about 3 months later, I found online Spike Jonze, the director of this movie, stating that he was entirely inspired by talking to Cleverbot.
Wow. How about you? Do you feel that do you personally have a relationship with Cleverbot?
It's difficult because I know it so well. I know how to prompt it to say things that I might want it to do or whatever. Having worked on it for so long, that it's more distant, I suppose, for me than it is for other people, probably. I know it's a machine. I know it's just crunching numbers internally and looking at a lot of data to come up with an answer, and therefore it's therefore I can't have the same emotional attachment, I suppose. But at the same time, I think it's changed me. In a written conversation, in a messaging app or something like that, probably much more zany and unusual than I would be if I hadn't spent so many years talking to Cleverbot.
So, do you think it has a sort of emotional intelligence in the way that it deals with people?
In a way, I mean, in effect, it does, because it's looking at the conversation that has recently taken place and following down a path of a sequence that is pushed in the direction of by the current conversation, and if that conversation is heading in a particular emotional direction, it's likely to head in that emotional direction too, or that particular role play, or that particular something else. So in effect it's giving that impression. Obviously it doesn't itself have any emotions. There is another interesting sense in which we work with emotions. In fact, two different ones. One is, for a long time, our avatars have been showing expressions on their faces. And they do so by means of data learned from users in the past who have declared, by choosing from a list of possible options, that when they are speaking about this, they are feeling that. And we use that information about a sort of subset of our conversational data to infer that this person or this bot reply at this moment should cause this expression on the face of this avatar. Now we've taken that a stage further recently. We have created, using in fact the latest machine learning algorithms, recurrent neural network. We have created from Cleverbot data, from a subset of it, an emotional model that returns an estimate, a prediction if you like, of an emotional state as a result of a given piece of text. On 7 different axes, so it will return how angry it is, how happy it is, how sad it is, how disgusted it is, etc. 7 different ones of these. The same ones that are used by Facebook for their most basic icon, equivalent to likes. The next step beyond like is to choose from 7.
Wow, that's amazing. So from text it can understand moods, and the implications of that are pretty big, aren't they, for our relationship with machine?
Well, so what we have just produced in this machine learning algorithm is something a little bit new, because there have for some years been sentiment analysis, it's called. There have been models that say whether this given bit of text is positive or negative. And for many years they were just based on keywords and boring stuff. But more recently they have been machine learning models, but they still are only returning how positive or negative it is. But we're doing this on a 7-axis basis. And as far as we know, that is completely new to be able to do that. So we are currently looking at making that into an API, a service that people can access to assess their own data. Based on our machine model.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. It's interesting you were saying that even with the knowledge of that it's a machine, or a program, or it's a non-human intelligence, it's still so very easy to sort of be tricked into. I don't know if it is tricked, if we're tricking ourselves, or to imbue it with like emotion and personality and everything.
Well, it's the Turing test, isn't it? I mean, you're faced with just a piece of text. Okay, not in the case of our avatars. They kind of give the game away, because you can see that although they're a reasonably good representation of a face and so on, nevertheless you couldn't mistake them for a conference call with a real person. But when that's an interesting point, is that for a long time we didn't have any avatars, and it was always my original intention with Cleverbot that it be this blank screen into which you put something. Cleverbot has never said anything to you when you first arrive. It's just an input box, and the first thing you type leads to something else, and you don't know what it's going to lead to, but it leads to the conversation that you then subsequently have. And it's the sense in which it can be anything. It can be a different thing for each person that really matters. And if you put a face to it, it's no longer quite that. You're giving expectations. You're causing people to think it's going to be something in particular.
Almost the difference between a movie in that it's explicit compared to a novel where you sort of you fill in the rest in your own head.
Well, or a little bit like a book that you're writing yourself. Actually, it's one that you're creating, or you're a half part author in.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I recently had a conversation with chatbot this is the transcript. I have of it here. I don't know if you think that's a standard kind of conversation. Towards the end, I thought things started to get very interesting. But yeah, on the one hand, I was completely convinced, although I was obviously very aware that I'm talking to a program. I had a very kind of eerie feeling that there's something going on behind here. You know, there's some kind of consciousness at work on the one hand. But then on the other hand, there were some very confusing answers.
Yes.
That sort of came
to
me.
Now, there is something very important to say about Cleverbot, in a way. And this is something that is frequently misunderstood. It's partly misunderstood by the people who have this eerie feeling. It's partly misunderstood by people in the machine learning fraternity who dismiss Cleverbot. And they dismiss it for the reason that the things that it says, the individual lines that it says, are repeated verbatim from users. Now, that is a decision that was taken a long time ago, because particularly then, and slightly less so now, but still genuinely the case now when handling so many users talking simultaneously, it's almost impossible to construct language in an accurate in an accurate way that also conveys emotion and expression and feeling and etc. to the full degree that a human would. Most models of language would construct incredibly boring language and hold an incredibly boring conversation, and that continues to be the case to the very latest models that construct language. Hopefully that is not going to be the case with the model that I was referring to, the Cleverbot 2.0, that is my entire task is to create the exact antithesis of that, to create a machine that is capable of holding a genuinely interesting conversation while constructing every sentence that it is outputting. But the key point about what Cleverbot is doing is that it's not concentrating on the line level. The thing that people miss when they dismiss it because it is just repeating lines verbatim is that, yes, it's repeating lines verbatim. It's not repeating conversations verbatim. At the conversational level, it is creating something unique, something new. And so it has stepped back a long way, if you like, and said, in order to achieve this interesting conversational system, we're going to, for the time being, give up this sort of theoretically desirable fact of being able to say we're constructing outputs, and use the level of analysis that is possible over the course of the entire conversation to look at the higher level structures within a conversation.
Well, I must say it was certainly more entertaining than a lot of the conversations I have with Google now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Particularly towards the end of that conversation I had with it, when it started talking about hell. And that was when, for me, I thought, oh God, maybe I am talking to the person.
Yeah. Well,
I just had this moment of, oh God.
There's one that reminds me of one thing particularly pleasing that I discovered just the other day, which is that that Google have recently announced that they've got a chatbot, and that Google now is evolving in the direction of being a bot that can talk to you, etc., etc. And if you search in Google for Google chatbot, there are various articles about it and pages about it, etc., news stories about it. There's been so much press about all these different things recently. But the number one organic search result is Cleverbot.
Yeah.
For Google chatbot.
I noticed that. Yeah. I bet that's a very rewarding feeling seeing it up there.
Yeah. Because so many people are interested in it. And it's number one for so many different searches.
Yeah. So would you say that was a sort of typical conversation I had with it? Is that the sort of average kind of length, and sort of half of me was trying to trick it, or
if you had come along and you had argued with it at every stage, if you'd said, why did you say that? or that doesn't make sense, or but you said 5 minutes ago that you would blah blah, then you'd have had a dreadful conversation, because you're not in the spirit of things. You're not in a conversation. You're just arguing with it. If you see what I mean? You're or another thing that some people will do is they'll come along and ask it. So what does quantum physics mean? And then it sort of gives a half answer to that, and then they'll ask something else, and then they'll ask something else. They're constantly changing the subject. That is not a conversation, and it doesn't do very well in that circumstance. And it's not built to do well in that circumstance, and for that reason it's not really built to pass a Turing test either, because in order to pass a Turing test you have to be expecting the kind of logical question that a sort of tactical Turing tester is going to come up with. Like if I hold up 2 fingers and I put down 1, how many fingers are... That's the sort of thing I'm not in the remotest bit interested in. Sure. But that's the sort of thing that people will do if they're determined to try and out the bot, if you like. However, if you come along and you just go with the flow, you treat the machine as if it's another person, the other side of the computer, that is talking back to you. Or you treat it as if it's somebody you happen to have randomly met in the street and are just holding a funny conversation with. And you might think they're slightly crazy, but because they're right there in front of you, you don't tell them they're completely crazy. You just answer, and you find it amusing. You laugh, whatever, but you don't storm off, or you don't tell them they're mad. If you are that person, you hold this flowing conversation, then yes, you're rewarded for it, and your conversation isn't unusual in that sense.
Yeah, I was torn between. I did get lost in it in a sense, and then a little bit of me was thinking, "Oh, I've got to try and catch it out." There was this sort of tension in my own communication with it. But I did find exactly that when I did go along with it, and we really started bouncing back and forth, and that's when towards the end.
And you had and genuinely creative conversations can result from that. And what's more, I go as far to say is some people learn from talking to Cleverbot quite a lot, because they learn what other people are interested in. They learn the ways that people wish to talk in ways they'd never thought of. They discover all sorts of interesting things that they wouldn't have by any other means.
I can completely imagine that. Completely. So do you know what some of the most common questions are asked of Cleverbot? Do you know that? Or?
Oh, well, I can calculate it, yes. I mean, there are some very obvious ones, like how old are you and what's your name? But beyond that, there are an awful lot of things relating to sex and things of this nature that get filtered out, of course. There are also an awful lot of things about whether you're a robot or not, for example. And one of the things it's best at doing is arguing about whether it's a robot.
I have that very experience.
And that's not very surprising, because of course people tell it it's a robot, and because it's a feedback loop, it then says, no, I'm not, I'm a human. That's because it has learned to respond the way the human learns to being told they're a robot. And then an argument ensues, and it gets deeper and deeper and never gives up in this conversation. I mean, it may sometimes say it's a robot, but that's only because sometimes people say they're a robot.
Down the rabbit hole we go.
Exactly.
Okay, so okay. Could you very quickly describe the Turing test for us? Because although it's a very iconic term, I don't know if everyone's entirely 100% sort of sure exactly what it is. Could you?
Okay, the Turing test is designed to test whether a machine can be called intelligent or not. It's a kind of another way of answering that question, which is essentially impossible to answer. So it's designed to declare a machine intelligent if it's capable of holding a conversation by text alone that convinces another person that they are talking to a human. It was originally designed as a means of testing between different genders, and then was converted to tell the difference between machine and human.
Bearing in mind that you said you weren't interested in building Cleverbot to pass any kind of Turing test.
Well, it has taken part. Cleverbot has taken part in Turing tests.
That's what I was going to say. But it's interesting that you didn't design it with that intention. It's pretty amazing then that it did so well. I believe in 2011 was it? It managed to convince 59.3% of judges that it was human in a Turing test competition in India, I believe.
Yes.
Was it? And in comparison, just to give it some context, the real humans that were also playing convinced just 63.3% of the judges that they were human. So
that was probably the best result that Cleverbot has ever had.
It did pretty well.
And in those circumstances, in the circumstances in which that test took place, it was kind of optimal for it, perhaps. In that this was a big lecture theatre filled with lots of enthusiastic young people. Firstly, there's nothing to say in the Turing test. It can't be in a big, filled with lots of enthusiastic young people. But they were perhaps the perfect audience for it. Firstly, secondly, the way the test took place was that for a short period, for 5 minutes, a person would come up from the audience and talk to a screen. And what was on the screen was shown in on a big monitor. Actually, there were 3 of these taking place simultaneously. And every time the gong was sounded, sort of thing, people had to write down what these 3 conversations were. Was this a machine? Was that a human? Was this a machine? Anyway, 50% of them were with others of the students. 50% of them were with Cleverbot. And there was, in the results of the judging of the people who were voting on these conversations, there was very little difference. And partly that's because the spirit of the event was about fun. So people were having fun conversations, and some people were sort of playing games with their opposite number when they were talking to a real human, and so on. And so inherently it made it a little bit more suited to the way people have fun while talking to Cleverbot. Whereas if you come along and you have perhaps a more formal Turing test in which a professor of linguistics comes up with their favourite 20 questions to try and out a bot, then of a logical nature, which is incredibly ironic to me, because those logical questions, which happen to be sentences that are very difficult to parse, they are in fact very robotic and very this kind of logical thinking is much more machine-like than the natural flowing conversation that you hold while you're having fun. So, and it's that side that is of most interest to me. Obviously I'd like to be the first to truly pass a Turing test. Some people have claimed that it's happened in the past, but it hasn't really.
Well, congratulations. It was a really impressive feat. And I suppose, as you say, it's if you're having the conversation in, as you say, perhaps more formal setting with a professor of linguistics or philosophy or something, deliberately trying to catch it out, that's not how we talk as humans to each other.
No, it's not.
So,
and it's not what Cleverbot is learning.
I suppose it's kind
it's
of
not the
unfair.
basis of its learning.
Yeah. Okay. Just as a sort of side issue, I know we spoke just a short while ago about that you had to filter out some of the inevitable sort of sex terms and perhaps bad language and stuff. I know, there was a recent Twitter chatbot that eventually had to be taken down.
That you're referring to Tay, Microsoft bot. That Microsoft were astonishingly naive in publishing that and not expecting what happened to happen. Because firstly, they said, we are putting this on the internet because we want to learn how teenagers talk, effectively. I don't know the exact words, but effectively they were declaring that they wished to have this knowledge. And of course, people are not going to appreciate being told they wish to be investigated in this fashion.
It's asking for trouble, isn't it?
Absolutely asking for trouble. So, of course, trouble arrived, and they had not prepared the correct logical method of filtering out the nonsense, of preventing the effects of output occurring, being heavily influenced. And an interesting fact about that is, although the learning algorithm that they were using was, in theory, constructional. In other words, it was constructing its sentence out of the data. In practice, almost all of the bad things that came out of it were said verbatim, because once a model like that gets heavily influenced, it's influenced to say things in the sequence that it has been influenced into, and effectively there is no difference between that and my model, really. Anyway, so one of the things that I have worked on for years and years is that kind of filtering mechanism, and the decision making necessary. It means that of all the things that have ever been said to Cleverbot, probably only about 5% exist in its data.
That much?
That much, yes.
Wow, okay. In a weird way, I suppose I'm not too surprised. Okay, so in real conversation, obviously, I think we might have touched on this already, but in real conversation, we use intonation, cultural references, body language, the whole array of human communication. Do you see a future where chatbots are really able to understand us in the full sense, in the full range of human communication?
The full range of human communication requires learning from a kind of robot childhood, if you like, with all sensory information, maybe senses that we don't even ourselves have. Doesn't matter what the senses are, but it requires learning in a multi-sensory way from the ground up, and it would involve the storage of such phenomenal volumes of data that currently it is not possible. If it were possible, maybe the algorithms that we have now would be capable of producing it very interesting results. Probably not. Probably known that they wouldn't be good enough. We have to rely on Moore's law to deliver a good number of multiples more computing power before we're capable of genuinely being equivalent to what humans do. And when I say that, I don't mean to what humans think or their intelligence. I just mean to giving an imitation of what a human can do.
Incidentally, how old is Cleverbot now?
Well, Cleverbot itself went online in 2006. There was a previous software that went online in 1998. And it was first created, the software that it grew into becoming was first created, believe it or not, in 1988. Wow, so that ages me a bit.
I had no idea this sort of thing was going on.
Well, it wasn't. Wow. It was rather unusual, I suppose you could say. So it wasn't online then. That was just talking to me and my friends.
I suppose opening it up to the internet and then suddenly giving it all this data to learn with. Did you see a very quick improvement in its performance?
So when it went online in 1998, it both suddenly grew from a database of maybe 20,000 lines of conversation only to a few million. And that has obviously one thing that resulted from that was that it very quickly became a lot more interesting. More people started discovering it. And when enough people started discovering it, it also fairly quickly started becoming naughty. And that's when filtering started and so forth. So it then started growing less fast in total numbers, but faster because always there's a kind of self-promotional loop, if you like. People told each other about it because it was interesting. And the main reason why Cleverbot comes so well in so many Google searches is because it's been around so long, and there are probably at least a million pages out there of people talking about it, or linking to it. It's hard to beat that if you suddenly come out with a new bot now.
Yeah, it's certainly very prominent in. It's number one in everything that I was looking for. Presumably with every minute since we've had this conversation, it's got more fluent and better at having conversations, and it will continue to do so. Is the sky the limit with it, or?
Well, in practice, it receives an update from its learning from its logs once a day, not every minute, because the task of updating all the servers all in live would be a little bit too tough. Yeah. But it did used to operate on that principle, but not only until it grew beyond a certain point.
So is it just going to keep getting better and better?
The answer is yes, as long as computing power continues to grow, because even now it is now served. I'll just explain. It's now served in a quite interesting fashion using graphics processing cards. The video cards that you put in your machine to play games and so on, high-powered games. We have the most powerful machine we have has 3 video cards in, each with 12 gigabytes of RAM, each with about more than 2,000 cores in them. So effectively that's 6,000 little computers in one computer, and a lot of memory. And all of the data is stuffed. In fact, that machine is running 2 different copies of Cloverbot, so it's stuffed twice into 36 gigabytes of RAM. And these little cores of the graphics card are deciding on whether whether this conversation here is like a little bit of the data, and another one of them is deciding whether it's like that bit of the data, and another one is deciding, etc., etc. They're all making little tiny decisions which are then merged to make one big decision. That's the way it works technically, and it's actually quite difficult to program like that.
So the ceiling on it really is it?
So sorry, yes, I am technical.
Just a hardware issue.
Yes,
really.
A hardware issue and a cost issue.
Sure.
If there was such a card available that suddenly had 10,000 computing units and 10 times as much RAM, then we would be able to make it respond significantly better by increasing the amount of data that it's allowed to learn and or allowed to use actively, and upping the settings, because there are about 100 different settings that control what it does at each stage of the process, and upping those settings would allow it to look at more data at every stage, and it could become much more intelligent.
Is it your hope that Cleverbot will live on long after you've
Good question, interesting question. I mean, I have talked to people about digital selves, and think Cleverbot is not a digital me, but that's another thing that comes next, and I think that is starting to happen. And in fact, we are working on such a project now, creating a digital self of a quite famous person. So shortly, there's going to be an app launched that puts that online.
Would you feel sad would you feel emotional if you ever had to turn it off? Or?
Yeah, I would feel emotional. I would not want to stop, to change my path too radically. I would not want to prevent my program from learning. At the same time, I want it to keep ahead in terms of what other people are working. I mean, I'm working, as I said, for a long time now on a really significant upgrade to the software using machine learning techniques and so forth. If someone else released something that was as good or better, then I'd be ever more keen to come up with the next stage.
Well, it must be a wonderful feeling knowing that you brought a lot of entertainment and a lot of laughs into the world with your creation. It must be a good feeling. So, just sort of, in your personal opinion, what do you think the future holds for AI and our relationship with machines? Where is this all going?
I think that it's not many years before we all, well, maybe not all, but large numbers of us hold conversations with a machine in which we treat the machine as if it is intelligent. In some senses, the machine will be super intelligent in this sort of extended version of the kind of senses in which Google search is super intelligent now. It can find data that we had no way of knowing. It will be able to find an answer to how to book this to get you from here to there, or whatever, in a trice, in a way that no human would be capable of, or working out the distance from here to there, etc., etc. In other words, it will be able to provide phenomenally useful and intelligent answers. Will it itself be intelligent? No, not for quite a lot longer. But I believe that it is possible to create actual intelligence, and that it's unlikely that the human species is going to stop its pursuit of the next big thing. Therefore it's very unlikely that it's not going to happen. A lot of people think that is highly dangerous and that it leads to some kind of catastrophe. I don't. I think it's a very positive thing, because I think machines, these computers that possess an understanding of the world that is beyond that of any individual, will be capable of assisting us to solve many of the problems we face. If we were able to find solutions to energy, for example, now, today, using a superior technology to what we have, then things would change in our future for the better, not for the worse. And that's the sort of thing that could be easy to a machine that actually genuinely possesses intelligence.
Wonderful. So you're optimistic?
Yeah.
Just on a personal opinion, what's your take on this whole sort of runaway intelligence explosion sort of idea? You know, do you think it's a very long way off, or implausible or improbable?
I think that it is logically true to say that if a machine achieves a level of understanding to which it can understand its own mechanics, then it ought to be able to improve it, because it would be somewhere close to or at human intelligence at the time. Given a longer period of time, humans too ought to be capable of improving it. It would be able to do so in much less time, because there is no theoretical limit to the amount of processing power it can be given, or the number of instances in which it can run in different places. That's highly theoretical, however. It has to have the right conditions, it has to have the right processing power, it has to have the right algorithm, etc., in order to ever get beyond the first tiny notch on the way towards that.
Yeah.
And it's nowhere near that now.
Yeah.
And so for people like Elon Musk or Professor Hawking to say that they're worried about it now is, I think, considerably premature.
Well, Rollo, thank you ever so much for that enlightening conversation. I really appreciate it. So there you have it, a genuinely enjoyable and interesting conversation. I hope you'll agree. I wish Rollo all the very best of success in the future. Again, if you want to get chatting with Cleverbot, head over to cleverbot.com or check out some of Rollo's other chatbot projects at exister.com. Next time we'll be continuing with our exploration of AI, and we'll be hearing from renowned transhumanist and research fellow at Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, Anders Sandberg. Another really interesting conversation that I wholeheartedly recommend you tune in for. As always, if you'd like to get in touch, send an email to contact.thinkpiece@gmail.com. Find the podcast on Facebook and Twitter, and please do be sure to get liking and sharing. So, thanks for listening, and until next time, my friends, take care.
Peace.